Welcome everybody to Line by Line through the Torah. Let's start off with the first line. Good place to start. Bereshis bara Elokim et Shemayim ve'et haaretz. The Ramcham, the Moshe Chaim Zato, points out that the more familiar something is, the less we sometimes understand it. And that is no less true with this first line, one of the most famous verses in the world. Most people are familiar with, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. What's strange and what we want to uncover in this verse is this is a very strange way to start a Bible. I use the word Bible. The Jewish title for the book is, as Rav Noach pointed out, is called Torah Chayim. The word Torah means instruction, and Chayim is for life. Bible is from the Latin word biblioc, which means really book, the book, which doesn't really tell you very much. But Torah Chayim means the instructions for living. Everything in life, the more sophisticated it is, the more true this is. But everything in life comes with instructions. You can't buy a toothbrush today without having instructions. The more sophisticated, the more instructions are necessary to be able to function. Even animals are built in with this process. It's very hard for an animal that has not got a parent that's going to instruct it in what to do when it wakes up. So life is not meant to be figured out on the way. It's meant to have instructions that come with it. The most sophisticated thing in life is life. Very few people get through life the way they would like to. And even the people who get through life and are happy with how it ends are very rare and far between. Life is not built in such a way that it just comes natural. So it needs instructions. To think that we would be created in this universe without instructions is absurd. And we see even more so that as the non-Jewish world has grown in sophistication and functionality, it's only because they have discerned the meaningful instructions of life and been able to pass them on one generation to the next. So implicitly, life needs to come with instructions. And that is the concept of the Torah. But what a strange way to start the Torah. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The only reason I think that most people find this verse not strange is because, as I said at the beginning, it's so familiar. So how should the Torah start? How should the Bible start? Well, to understand this, I'll give you a simple concept. If you divide all the books in the world into two categories, all the books in the world can be divided into two simple categories, what we call non-fiction and what we call fiction. Now, the term fiction is an interesting term because what it means is, it always used to confuse me as a child, because the term fiction is the negative of the concept, meaning fiction meaning not true. Not true, there's true, which is the positive aspect of the concept, and then there's not true. But in books, we call it we reverse that order. And so the thing that's true is non-fiction, and the thing that's not true is called fiction. How did that come about? Because in the ancient world, you never wrote a book that wasn't true. Writing was very expensive. Writing a book was very, very expensive. Copying, all handmade, the paper was very expensive. So no one would bother writing fairy tales. So the only reason you'd write anything down was because this is the truth that everybody must know. And therefore, if it was written down, it was true, or was purported to be true. And that was the only category there was. As printing became cheaper and people were starting to write what we call today fiction, they had to give it a title. They had to call it something. The default had no name because that's all there was. So they called the new thing a fiction. And therefore, by default, the truth became the nonfiction. Just to give you an idea of how the mankind viewed books in the first place. So if you divide all the books in the world into these two basic categories, and you had to go through all of them, let's just say, the Library of Congress, an earthquake hits, God forbid, and all the books fall into a big crater, and we're being tasked with reorganizing them again, millions and millions of books. Obviously, it's a Herculean task. And the chief librarian says, listen, first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to divide all the books into fiction and non-fiction. It's a simple categorization. So how can you know which ones are which? Unless it's written on the book, this is a fiction book or this is a non-fiction book, how can you know? It's very, very simple. Every fictional book starts the same way, and every non-fictional book starts in a different but same way. It's the same for all non-fictional books. And if you think about it for a minute, if you want to pause this video, you can figure it out for yourself. How do all non-fictional books start? And it's very simple. All non-fictional books start with an introduction, a preface, a foreword, and all fictional books start the same way. Chapter 1, it was the best of the years, it was the worst of the years, etc., etc. Long, far, far, far in a galaxy far away, the evil emperor, etc., etc., etc. Right? In a non-fictional book, that description would have been the introduction. Now, there's no rule that says you have to do this, but every writer of fiction and non-fiction understands this is the way you write. How is it? Why is this so? Because when you're writing non-fiction, you're competing against other people that are writing this on the same topic. When you're writing fiction, you're not competing with somebody on the same topic. You're just trying to appeal to the sense of fantasy. In other words, when you pick up a fictional book, you're not picking up Star Wars because you want to know how to fly to Mars. You're picking up Star Wars because it's escapism. You just want a fantasy, whatever the theme happens to be. When you're picking up nonfiction, and just say gardening, the introduction is going to tell you what kind of gardening. Does the author know what he's talking about? How long is it going to take me to learn this, etc., experience and things like that, to decide whether I'm going to buy the book. With fiction, you don't need such a thing like that because it's just a fantasy. I want a science fiction novel. I want a romance novel. I want an action novel. I want suspense novel. Agatha Christie, for instance. So right from the very beginning, you can tell whether this is a fictional book or a non-fictional book. Since all non-fictional books begin the same way with an introduction, and all fictional books begin with the storyline at the beginning, in the once upon a time, how does our Bible, how does our Torah sound? Does it sound like fiction or does it sound like non-fiction? Well, any objective reader, I think, will agree that unfortunately the Torah sounds like fiction. In the beginning, God created the heaven. Where's the introduction? Who is God? What beginning? I mean, all these kind of questions percolate when you open up the first sentence. How can you start a Torah? And I should add that the New Testament has an introduction and the Quran has an introduction. I don't want to be disparaging here, but nevertheless, they have an introduction. You have an introduction because you're presenting the ultimate. A Bible is not only is it non-fiction, it's the ultimate in non-fiction. It's the ultimate in non-fiction. How is this how is this book? This book is the ultimate instruction book. It's the gardening manual of gardening manual. It's the cooking manual of cooking manual. It's got everything about life contained within it. This is the ultimate science book. This is the ultimate uh, instructions for living. This is it. This is what it is. God's word to mankind. This is how life works. It's the ultimate, and every Bible purports to be the same thing. And therefore, as the ultimate nonfiction, it requires, it necessitates a great introduction. And that is exactly what the Torah has, but it's not here. Where is the introduction? I always like to ask people this question. If you were Jewish, hopefully you are Jewish, where would you put the introduction? Where would a Jew put the introduction to the Torah? Of course, the answer is at the end. How does the introduction to the Torah go at the end? Well, that's the Talmud points out, Jewish law explains, that the very first thing we teach our children is not Bereshis bara Elokim. It's not in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. The very first thing that we teach our children is a line, a verse in the last parsha of the Torah. Torah Siva Lanu Moshe. We have a Torah. It is an instruction book of life given to us by Moses, and it's part of the inheritance. It is your inheritance as the descendants of Yaakov. That's the first idea you teach your children. You don't teach them who Yaakov is. You don't teach them who Moshe is. You don't teach them any of that. This is the first idea you teach them. That is the introduction. Why is that the introduction? So you see, for the Torah, for the ultimate, penultimate non-fictional book, it needs the ultimate introduction. Where is that introduction? It's a living introduction between the parents, God, and the Torah, and the children. The parents give the introduction. It isn't given over in writing. It has to be carried on orally, verbally, parent to child, parent to child, parent to child, throughout history for the last 3,000 years. That's where we get the introduction. That's very significant. And now we understand a very simple, a very important idea. When the introduction isn't given, then the book reads as fiction. When the book introduction is the same book, nevertheless, will be read very differently, dependent, and that's how we lost a whole generation of people, because people forgot, for whatever reason, to give their children the introduction. Now, with that introduction, we're going to meet a fascinating Rashi. The Rashi comes along and says, and now we understand this Rashi. Rashi one is the I don't know how you phrase it. He is the baseline, the go-to commentator on the Torah. And he says a fascinating thing. The Torah shouldn't have started here. The first Rashi, the Torah shouldn't have started here. Now, it should have started in the book of Exodus. Now, that's a very chutzpah thing to say. Right? I mean, I've written a few books myself, and I've gotten lots of flack on all of them, and that's fine. It goes with the territory. But nobody ever said to me, you shouldn't have started here. That's one of the things that you really have a hard time criticizing an author for. An author is entitled to start the book wherever he wants. How he continues the book, how he draws the story along, how he engages the audience, all those kind of things. Then you can have an argument with that, the points that he makes, the derivatives he draws, all those kind of things you can criticize an author. But where he starts the book, oh my goodness, how can you tell God where he starts the book? Now, this is a very important Rashi, as you'll understand, because it's teaching you about how to think about the Torah. The Torah isn't like, this is, so to speak, as I grew up in good old England, like, this is the word of God. Just sit back and, listen and just have reference and that's it. The reference is due, the awe is due, but that's not how you approach it. Rashi comes along and says, it should have started over there. It's telling you in the way he does that, in just that message itself, the Torah is meant to be dissected. It's meant to be, all these Bible critics come along and they think they came up with something new. I never saw a Bible criticism that had any substance to it. I've seen lots of silly ones, but not with any substance that wasn't already raised long before, because that's how we studied the Torah. Because it's the only way to study the Torah, which is a very important idea, which is going to digress tremendously, but it's a very, very important idea. How we learn in life is very simple. You have a boat, you build a boat, it goes out on the Atlantic, it hits an iceberg, you go, oh my goodness, this is not working. We've got to build a different kind of boat, a different type of system, a different type of practice. And so now today, we live in a world that's very, very rare. I don't think since the Titanic that we've ever experienced another catastrophe like that. I heard a few years ago that the FAA, FAA is a flight something or other, the people that control the airplanes, they said in 1 year, it was a few years ago, but they never had a fatal accident. In other words, every accident they had, when I grew up, planes were going down like paper planes. But they learned from each iteration, built safer planes, better flight controls, all kinds of different, better training, etc., etc. Now it's very, very rare that planes go down. Last few years we have seen a few, but it's very, very rare experience. They really got it down to a T. So that's how we learn. It's a very painful way to learn. You don't want to have to go through that. We've all had our head handed to us. We've all got lashes on the back, not literally, hopefully, but we've all got the painful experiences along the way where we thought how to build a boat. We sent it out. We thought how to get married, how to have kids, how to have a career, how to have friends, how to etc. 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 And we got hit by an iceberg. Things didn't work out, and then we had to take the gap between how we thought it would work and what actually did work, and that gap is the lesson learned. The better way to do it is to learn from the Torah. The Torah, the concept of the Torah is every single category of mistake you could possibly ever make in life. One of the great points of the Torah is there is a history of people who blew it, which is remarkable because people don't write, as Winston Churchill said, history is written by the victors. That people don't write histories which they expose all their failures. It's very, very reluctant. The Torah, in an age when people didn't do this, the Torah is writing all the mistakes of humanity, all the way from Adam to Moses, and all these classic mistakes, and how we're supposed to learn, and which is a great way to learn, which is the way to learn, which is the way to have a successful life, is to ask ourselves this very fundamental question. If I was in the Garden of Eden and I had that choice, what would I have done? And the gap between what I would have done and what was done, right, is the lesson. And as we go through, we're going to see some fascinating things, because what you've got to understand is the thinking that I would have eaten the other fruit is a big mistake. You've got to figure out why you would have eaten the wrong fruit. Then you'll understand the lesson. It's easy to say, well, I wouldn't do that then. There's two things that every human being thinks. One is they think they're a good man or good woman. Everybody thinks they're good. Even Hitler, even Hitler thought he was a good man. He said, I come on a mission from God. Everybody thinks they're a good person. Everybody. That's number one. No matter how overtly obvious it is that they're despicable, they all think they're good people. right? And there's lots of evidence for that, which we're not going to get into now. Everyone thinks they're good. Everyone thinks they're good. The second thing is everyone thinks they think. You can't tell people they're not good, and you can't tell people they don't think, because everybody thinks they're good and everybody thinks they think. Obviously, our mistakes point out that that's not true, but it's very hard to see. Even after you make a mistake, it's very, very hard to see how you weren't thinking. The way to understand this and to make it less painful is to learn the Torah. Is to go, why would I have eaten from that tree? And that's what we're going to do as we go through each of the stories. Why would you have made that same mistake? And you have to understand how you do make that same mistake, and we do make that same mistake. And the gap between that mistake and what we should have done, how we should have thought it through, is the great lesson in life. So getting back, Rashi says it should have started over there, which is a great way to introduce the Torah and how we're supposed to think about it. There's nothing sacrosanct in that sense. You're supposed to examine it, but Rashi is saying, why should it have started over there? It should have started over there because that's the first mitzvah. Because the introduction is we have an instruction book of life. In other words, imagine for a minute you decide to take up engineering, and you go to engineering school, and the first day of class is the history of Henry Ford. Grew up in a farm, right? And then they go to the history of Edison. He grew up in New Jersey, and he had this month and this month. I'm not interested in Newton's background. Right? I just want to know, what are the physics? What's the rules? What is the engineering lessons that go on? You see? So I'm coming to school to get the instruction book. That's what I want is the instructions. So Rashi's commandment. If you expect the instructions, you should start with the first instruction, which is telling us a very deep idea. Nothing in life is what it is. It's all relative to what we expect it to be. We're not unhappy. We're just disappointed. As long as the thing meets your expectations, you are perfectly fine. You go to the gym, and I guess you might be in better shape than me, but I go to the gym. The trainer looks at me and says, "Get off that treadmill. You're going to die." He sit down, have a cup of coffee, and then give a donut. I'll work out for you. You're not touching those machines, right? So I'll be very disappointed. Alternatively, I take a cruise, and I have to puff my own pillows. I'm going to complain to the captain. Nothing in life, whether it's pleasant or difficult, is bad. It depends what you expect. I had a student who volunteered to the Israeli army. He wanted to be a paratrooper. Now, I don't want to be too offensive here, but even though sometimes I am, but he was American. He is American. And the IDF doesn't take too highly regard of Americans. They're kind of soft. So they didn't bring the paratroopers, the elite units. Right? He complained so much, they finally said, fine, you can jump out of the plane. Now, me personally, if I'm flying to Los Angeles and they throw me out of the plane 10,000 feet in the air, I'm going to be really disappointed. He was disappointed, but they didn't do that. Right? Because nothing in life is what it is. It's all relative to what you expect it to be. And here we can understand marriage and parenting. Our kids dish out, your dog dishes out more junk than your spouse ever could imagine doing. Yet with a spouse, we're upset, and our children were perfectly happy, because with marriage, we expect a very different thing than we expect with parenting. Nothing in life is what it is. It's all relative to our expectations. Have the right, that doesn't mean lower your expectations, because low expectations are worse than disappointment. Disappointment is debilitating. Low expectations, death. You don't want to go down that road. So we're going to learn, but what you should learn is the right expectations. And that's what disappointment is teaching you. You had the wrong expectations. Get the right expectation, get excited about life. With that note, got more to come. Stay tuned every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Sorry about the beginning. We all had some technical learning learning on the job here, just figuring out how this goes. Any comments, any questions, any criticisms, feel free, and looking forward to seeing you next week. Thank you, everybody.